Good morning and welcome to the launch of the State of AI for Decarbonisation 2025 report. My name is Sam Young and I am the AI Practice Manager at Energy Systems Catapult and the lead author of the report. Just a quick note about the format of this session. I'll be taking you through an overview of the report for the first 45 minutes, and then I'll be joined by Professor Emily Shuckburgh, the Chief Scientific Advisor for the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, to discuss the implications of the report together. We won't be taking questions from the audience during this webinar, but please do reach out to me afterwards if you'd like to discuss anything further. And this webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be circulated to everyone in attendance after the session. And with that, let me kick off. AI has been constantly in the headlines this year. We've seen jaw-droppingly large investments in AI data centers. We've seen AI companies starting to invest in the energy sector to secure energy for those data centers. We've seen businesses around the world starting to integrate generative AI into their software and processes. We've seen debates about the future of work and people either being worried or excited about AI's potential to automate jobs. And even kind of national carbon budgets have started including assumptions about AI's impact. But amidst that torrent of news and hype, it can be difficult to actually find the answer to an important question. How effectively is AI being applied to key societal challenges like decarbonisation? And here at Advice, the AI for Decarbonisation Virtual Centre of Excellence, which is a Department for Energy Security and Net Zero funded programme between Digital Catapult, Energy Systems Catapult, and the Alan Turing Institute, we have tried to help answer that question. So we have looked back at 2025 to see what progress has been made. And as we'll see as I talk you through this report, there has been some tangible impact with AI decarbonising the UK economy. There's also been some notable progress kind of in earlier stage research, but there are also many areas where benefits are not being realised or where generative AI has been hyped up but hasn't really delivered anything. The way that we have structured this is when we launched Advice a couple of years ago, we produced 7 grand challenges, which you can see on your screen now, looking at these are areas, critical decarbonisation challenges that AI could help with. And as part of this State of AI report, we have added 2 new ones, so optimising EV infrastructure and charging and decarbonising freight and trucking. And when pulling together this report, we had broken down those grand challenges into more specific challenge statements in the form of decarbonisation challenge cards. You can see an example there on the screen. And each of those sets out kind of a slightly more detailed element of that challenge and a suggestion for how AI might be able to help. And so we took each of those cards and performed research and looked for examples of how had AI been applied to each of those 97 cards, and then brought together all of that research, and domain experts kind of looked through it, looking for, well, where has there been progress? What are the key themes? What are the examples that we can find? Here we have an overview of what has that progress been. So the further to the right you are on this graph, the more mature an application is. And the light pink is roughly where was the maturity of this grand challenge in 2024, dark pink, the maturity at the end of 2025, and 2026, a rough idea of whether we think there's going to be lots of progress or only a limited amount of progress in the coming year. So let me talk you through a few of these quickly, and I'll start with the most mature. So in 2025, AI had a measurable impact on the UK's ability to operate a low carbon electricity grid. AI-powered solar nowcasting reduced emissions by an estimated 300,000 tonnes. Smart EV charging lowered peak electricity usage from electric vehicles by 42%. And we saw virtual power plants helping balance the grid on a daily basis. On net zero infrastructure, while some applications of AI to grid and renewable construction continue to grow in their adoption, there were other more splashy announcements that AI could significantly reduce connection queue times that actually failed to deliver tangible outcomes. Some areas where we've seen significant progress. So in domestic decarbonisation, there's been the national rollout of 2 AI tools looking to streamline different parts of the heat pump installation journey. And in improving manufacturing process efficiency, and in fact, a bit in transport process efficiency too, we've seen increasing adoption of AI and larger organizations starting to move from demonstration into deployment, though we do see smaller organizations typically lagging behind. Whilst at an earlier stage, AI for soil management progressed quite a bit from theoretical piloting to early commercialization, while applications in agricultural methane reduction made some progress at the research stage. Less progress was made on applying AI to decarbonizing manufacturing inputs or to electrifying freight, and this is partly due to the high capital costs involved in those. So these are the kind of areas that we may need more concerted effort and intervention to accelerate AI adoption. So that's the overview, and what I'm now going to do is go through each of the grand challenges and take you through those in more detail. The first is unlocking domestic decarbonisation. So residential heating is responsible for more than 13% of greenhouse gas emissions each year and is essential in decarbonising the UK economy. But decarbonising homes needs us to change both heating systems and consumer behaviours in almost every home in the UK. And so that needs us to engage consumers, finance it, and deliver it at pace. And all of those are major challenges. Some of the themes of AI adoption in this area. So we've seen AI be used to accelerate heating system design. And previously, this had just been piloted, but we're now seeing a national scale product launch that I'll go into on the next slide that really helps reduce heat pump installation costs and timelines. The other big national rollout is the Electricity Network Association's Connect Direct, which has removed friction in the admin process by using AI to help provide auto approvals to connecting installations of batteries, solar panels, EV chargers, heat pumps to the network using AI. We've seen some specialist chatbots aimed at supporting installers and consumers with things like heat pump installation. And those are available to people, but we haven't seen those kind of gaining significant traction really being used by lots of people. One area there is quite a lot of adoption is around identifying vulnerable energy consumers. And this ranges from call analysis, identifying signs of vulnerability on calls, through to trying to map current and future fuel poverty and vulnerability risks at a local level. And an area where AI has been used for a while is breaking down smart meter usage into different appliances. And that's been an area of academic work for a long time, but it's also already employed in a number of consumer-facing applications. A great example in this challenge is HeatGeek and their Zero Disrupt tool. So they have applied, after gathering lots of data about heat pump installations, they have applied AI to multiple points of the design and installation journey. So from speeding up the internal surveying of homes through to automatically populating forms, but also most importantly, selecting the optimal design parameters for the heating system to enable the target efficiency to be achieved at minimal cost. And in trials, this has reduced costs to consumers by 75% and also halved installation time. And this is really key because challenges with heat pumps relative to gas boilers are that they can typically be more expensive to install up front and take longer. Yeah, really major progress there. The key enablers and gaps for this sector. Heat pump installations are increasing, and so there's been lots more data available, including from national trials like the electrification of heat trial, where there's lots of heat pump monitoring data available, but also through kind of like a larger market being available for heat pump installations means more opportunity for AI innovators. We're also starting to see smart meter data becoming more available, whether that's through things like the Energy Systems Catapult Living Lab, but also synthetic smart meter data through the OpenSynth project, which is starting to enable innovators to build AI tools more effectively. There are some big barriers and gaps that we face in this challenge, though. So electricity is still more expensive than gas, and that makes making heat pumps cost competitive with gas boilers a real challenge, but it also means that using AI to optimize them becomes even more important. But also interoperability is a continuing challenge. The fact that there aren't open APIs or interoperable standards for data and controls means it can be quite challenging to scale AI solutions in this space. The next grand challenge is around enabling net zero infrastructure. So electrification of heating and transportation, combined with the fact that we have loads more renewables on our grid, means that we really need to expand our electricity networks significantly. And doing that at the required scale and pace is a real challenge. And so we're already seeing that new renewable projects, as well as data centers, are being delayed in their connection to the network because of our inability to scale quickly. Some of the big themes here. So as I mentioned earlier, there are some big announcements about being able to streamline grid connections and accelerate that process using AI. But that hasn't actually materialized this year. The government announced Connect tool has been paused. Some of the longer running tools to optimize infrastructure placement have been growing in adoption. So these really help reduce project development timelines and costs by providing more optimum layouts for infrastructure early on in the development cycle. An area where we've seen some significant progress this year is in real-time control and optimization. So this has tended to be now in the kind of like operational pilot stage, both on some network assets at the distribution level, but also reinforcement learning for wind farm control, which I'll go into in a minute. And the National Energy System Operator has a big Volta program, which is looking at how can AI be adopted within the national control room. One of the challenges of infrastructure is that it's cross-sector. So you have electricity, gas, but also water, transport, telecommunications. And it's also multi-scale. You need to plan at the site level, at the local level, regional and national. And how you do that kind of optimization and coordination across both sectors and scales is a real challenge. People have suggested AI could be really useful here, but at the moment, we're still at the stage of trying to establish really effective data sharing and digital twin initiatives that would then allow AI tools to start to have an impact. Generative AI has been applied a bit in this space, but that's largely been in kind of smaller areas around the edge, kind of improving data quality, and things like analyzing public sentiment to construction in their area, that kind of thing. It's not currently displacing the core engineering and optimization workflows. One of the most exciting developments this year is around wind farm control. So wind farms, if you imagine lots of turbines all spaced out in a grid, when the wind hits the first turbine, that creates kind of a shadow, a wake for the turbines behind it, and that reduces their output. And when designing wind farms, the developers try to design it to minimize these effects, but the wind changes direction, and that kind of makes it hard to design a perfect solution up front. And what the University of Warwick have done with their Aeolus tool is developed a deep reinforcement learning system that changes the angle of the turbine blades of the turbines in the wind farm to maximize the overall power output of the wind farm and to minimize the wake effects, which is a real step forward. Previously, it would only be done for individual turbines. And this, in 2025, kind of moved from late stage development into a real world pilot with operational control of a wind farm in the North Sea. And this is really exciting because it could deliver a 3 to 5% increase in annual energy output without us needing to build new infrastructure. So it's a really great example of where applying AI could deliver dramatic impacts. In terms of progress on this in the coming year, pressure to keep energy bills down and speed connections is really high. There's lots of political support for this. And so this is likely to be an area where there continues to be a lot of focus. And that's supported by the fact that AI companies need energy infrastructure. So are starting to put both cash and talent into how can we unlock some of this. But some of the challenges, the barriers that we face, a lot of this is in a highly regulated sector. And so many of the processes involved are kind of formalized in legislation or regulation. And changing those quickly requires a lot of political will. It's not just a case of having, oh, we can quickly implement some technology and that will solve it. And then also planning data, like the complexity and historically manual nature of the planning process means that consistent, good quality data is challenging. And that makes it really challenging to build AI tools in this area. And if you look in the main report, you will see some examples of that. But there has been some progress on that in the last year. The next challenge is around maximizing flexibility in energy networks. So as we have more renewables on the grid, we need to start moving when we use energy to match when energy is being generated. So when the wind is blowing and when the sun is shining. And this is a change for us as consumers, but it's also a radical change in how the network and the markets operate. And it's fundamentally dependent on using AI to forecast and optimize demand and supply at much more granular levels than ever before. So this is one of those areas where we won't be able to deliver this without AI. In many others, AI is helpful, but this is fundamentally dependent on AI. And 2025 has seen an acceleration in the deployment of flexibility, with AI playing a key role in that. So the first theme here is around virtual power plant orchestration, which is where an organization brings together lots of really small assets like EV chargers, batteries, and controls them all at once in order to provide benefits to the grid. And there are now multiple organizations doing that and using AI to manage that at a really large scale for our grid. We're also seeing at a smaller scale AI being used to match renewable generators to demand at a local level, which can really help increase the margins for renewables. One of the most exciting areas, which I'll cover in a second, is around using solar nowcasting, forecasting solar generation for the next few hours to improve control room decisions. Lastly, forecasting. It remains kind of like a foundation for flexibility. Many organizations rely on machine learning for forecasted demand generation and price. We're starting to see some progress in research and foundation models for both energy and other forms of forecasting, but I've yet to see the real world impact there. And we're also starting to see buildings and being able to be operated as flexible grid assets, starting to put the heating and cooling on at different times to benefit the grid. Let me take you through the Open Climate Fix solar forecasting example. So one of the challenges with solar generation is the fact that it's unpredictable, forces grid operators to maintain expensive fossil fuel backup capacity, which increases costs and emissions. And Open Climate Fix developed a deep neural network tool over the last few years that helps measure solar generation, numerical weather prediction, and satellite imagery to predict cloud movements and solar generation across the UK over the next few hours. And the result of this is that a massive improvement in the accuracy of the forecast, and therefore lower need to keep fossil fuel reserves in backup, with an estimated saving of 300,000 tons of CO2 and £30 million per year in balancing costs. And this will only grow over time as we have more and more solar generation. What are the enablers in this area? So the National Energy System Operator continues to digitalize. We have their open balancing platform, which is broadening access to grid services for new entrants, including those using AI optimization. We're also seeing increasing revenue flowing into flexibility markets, and that's starting to make it easy for people to see. Are people able to see the slides moving forward? I've had a query about that. Tabitha, maybe you could tell me if they're not. Yeah, they're moving, great. Then we're also starting to see relevant foundation models are starting to emerge around both general time series forecasting and around power systems and grids. So starting to see progress there. And we're also starting to see progress on interoperability. So this is particularly a challenge with controlling low carbon technology devices around the grid. And the Mercury Consortium has been established to start to develop an interoperability framework for control of clean tech devices. And the reason for that kind of speaks directly to one of these gaps. Integration remains a huge barrier. So lack of standards on connecting energy devices, metering across flexibility markets means you need lots of different integrations. And similarly, flexibility market structures are relatively complex and continue to evolve. And as a result, there can be quite a steep learning curve for tech native kind of like AI innovators trying to get into this space. An area that is both a gap and an opportunity is around flexibility within data centers, and data centers don't typically prioritize operating flexibly to benefit the energy system. But there's increasing attention at how that might be something that they could do, particularly as the amount of data centers grows. Looking at challenge number 4, decarbonizing manufacturing inputs. So many manufacturing processes rely on carbon-intensive fuels or raw materials, and decarbonizing the manufacturing requires a wholesale redesign of the processes and products to use low carbon inputs. But that's actually really complex and really costly. And that's probably why we've seen relatively limited progress on this challenge in 2025. There's quite a bit more focus on AF process efficiency, which is the next grand challenge, particularly where the commercial pull is stronger because it directly affects margins. Some of the themes where we have seen this, decarbonizing concrete and steel is a core focus. And the way that this is often approached is trying to predict the material properties, both at the design stage and in real time, to reduce the need to put higher carbon materials into the production of those. There's kind of like a few companies in the world specializing on this. And the UK is kind of not a huge leader, but has kind of some organizations involved. What we have seen over the last few years is particularly rising energy costs really drive a growing interest in renewables being located with manufacturing and construction. And the role that AI plays there is around how can you optimize the use of batteries, for example, to minimize emissions on site. One thing to note here is that the desire to decarbonize inputs and the adoption of AI are both generally higher in large manufacturers. And that's because they've got greater pressure to decarbonize, but also they have more capacity to consider it. So as a result, like AI startups tend to target larger companies. Many of the manufacturing SMEs aren't really thinking about either decarbonization or AI, let alone the intersection of the two. Some of the enablers for the coming year. So there is increasing access to data and models. So it's worth noting the Digital Materials Foundry, which you can find so that can be really helpful in accelerating AI development in this space. There's also some major research hubs So kind of EPSRC has launched some, including AI for manufacturing sustainability, but we're also seeing big academia industry partnerships, like a partnership between Tata Steel and academia to develop new kind of computational tools for predicting steel properties in electric arc furnaces. Carbon accounting, which is a kind of key driver, is continuing to develop, and we'll start to see more on Scope 3 emissions, and there's some simpler frameworks for manufacturers. Weak incentives make business cases challenging is kind of like a key gap, and this is particularly around like for SMEs. Why would they need to invest in using AI to decarbonize their inputs? We also see kind of AI being used for optimization and design exploration in specific verticals, but the combination of proprietary data and distinct physical processes means that there isn't always kind of like reused learning across those verticals. And then a lot of the focus is on the high intensity manufacturing, which makes sense. That's what we should prioritize. But that does leave a long tail of less intensive industries and also smaller manufacturers who aren't necessarily leveraging AI to accelerate decarbonisation. Looking at grand challenge number 5, so this is focused on improving manufacturing process efficiency. So for processes that are hard to fully decarbonize, improving the efficiency is important in reducing emissions. And for ones that we are going to try and fully decarbonize, it can take time, and improving efficiency in the meantime is still beneficial. And this is one that aligns well with business objectives to reduce costs, because as you improve efficiency, your costs go down too. And that makes it an area that's easier to start AI deployment in. But for many things, it ultimately doesn't eliminate the need to completely decarbonize the inputs. Themes in this space. So as I've said, high energy prices have made AI for energy optimization and waste reduction a high priority. One study found that up to a quarter of UK manufacturers are adopting some form of AI for that purpose. And another area where we have already seen quite a lot over recent years is predictive maintenance. And this kind of can reduce downtime and improve efficiency, and therefore kind of like reduce overall emissions. It's well supported by equipment suppliers and software platforms, and it's often one of the first AI projects considered by manufacturers. In some sectors, so automotive, aerospace, food and drink, and pharmaceuticals, there are quite strong compliance requirements, and therefore a greater case for machine vision-based defect detection, which again can help reduce waste and therefore emissions. And we're also seeing AI increasingly being embedded in planning, scheduling, and supply chain tools. And the extent to which AI is being used in these varies, but for larger manufacturers, it's increasingly the case. And this is kind of helpful for improving end-to-end efficiency. So an example is around manufacturing steel. So when you are heating up steel, that requires significant energy usage. And Deep Meta have used a physics-informed machine learning digital twin to predict more accurately when steel has been sufficiently heated. And therefore, you don't need to leave it in the furnace as long. You can get through more steel in a shorter amount of time. And combining this with optimizing when the furnace is turned on and off, and like detecting defects earlier in the process, has allowed them to reduce energy usage and reduce the kind of carbon potential of steel by about 5%. Some of the enablers in this area. So there's increased public funding focused on AI adoption and deployment rather than foundational research. So Made Smarter is a major national initiative that's expanding over the coming year, and that is also particularly focused on SMEs, which is encouraging. And then we're also seeing one of the barriers historically has been around data access and sensor data in sites. And we started to see wider retrofitting of sensors and gathering together of data on older sites, which paves the ground for AI adoption. One of the gaps that we see is that many existing case studies often focus on kind of site level deployments or trials. But there's kind of a lack of reference architectures that kind of like, how can you deploy AI quickly and effectively for these kinds of things across sites? And evidence on how companies are scaling AI implementation across those sites is not particularly well documented either. One of the big barriers, particularly for smaller companies, is building a business case and thinking about how you can provide guidance on how to employ AI cost effectively and minimize the upfront investment is something that is particularly important for smaller manufacturers. In some countries, we also see some acceleration from open source tools for process efficiency here. And in the UK, while some publicly funded testbeds exist, open data sets and tools are relatively scarce in manufacturing, which may hold back innovation. So that's a potential area for future. Moving on to agriculture. So Grand Challenge 6 is around optimizing soil management. In agriculture, soil is a major source of emissions, but it's also a potential route to storing carbon. And so optimizing the management of soil health from an emissions perspective is a key challenge. And we've seen 2025 has marked a shift from theoretical piloting to early commercialization with some major corporate insetting partnerships and some large-scale national government projects like AI for peat. AI for peat is kind of like a national scale AI mapping of peat and degraded soils that's now being used in environmental planning and restoration. We're also seeing that commercial services for precision nutrient irrigation management are already well established, particularly in high value horticulture and arable farming. And those often use advanced sensors and analytics. But many of them are rules-based and are only starting to use machine learning, though we are seeing some more of that at the moment. Mapping soils digitally is something, and kind of at scale, is something that's in the kind of R&D and early product stage. There's a big EU program on AI for soil health that the UK is part of that has some really valuable frameworks that are and some operational data that's feeding into various tools. Another element is around how can we combine AI-based measurement, reporting, and verification to underpin some of the soil sequestration and biodiversity kind of mechanisms. And so we're starting to see some of that as well, still a bit in pilot stage. And this is an area where there's an increasing number of kind of capacity building programs trying to transfer knowledge from academia and research into more of the wider sector. An example that's really tangible is Drone AG have an app called Skippy Scout, which is focused on how can you help farmers monitor crop health automatically. And so they use a simple smartphone app to plan the monitoring route, and then the drone flies autonomously through those waypoints, captures imagery of the plants, and then analyzes that using computer vision to identify signs of disease or kind of where there may be need for more or less fertilizer and help improve crop yields much more cheaply and at scale. In terms of enablers for this space, so farm digitization is improving. We're starting to see more data being available for us. So, for example, soil benchmark mapping software is used in 11.5% of England's farmland. We're also starting to see larger scale data sets and digital twins being available, and actually access to synthetic data sets focused on AI increasingly the case. So AgriSynth UK is leading an 18-month project that is deliberately trying to create high quality training data for AI by generating synthetic image data of crops. There are some gaps though. So as I said, the high value horticulture and arable is where there's been a lot of focus here. There's limited tools for that kind of integrates soil data with grazing plans, animal performance, and kind of some of the mixed and livestock or upland farms more challenging. How do you manage soil health in those contexts? And they're still often kind of like early prototypes. This is an interesting area where 2025 has emphasized the need for AI governance. So the release of the peatland map drew quite a bit of criticism due to kind of challenges around validation and transparency and process. So how we get that to build trust in data outputs from AI tools and to ensure that those actually are trustworthy is pretty critical. There's some need to tie more tightly the measurement and verification mechanisms to soil carbon credits, and currently that's really only at the experimental stage. And then lastly, a lot of the global equipment manufacturers do a lot of their AI for soil R&D internally using their own budgets, and the UK then can kind of struggle to engage with that due to kind of IP restrictions and things like that, which can make scaling kind of some of our UK-based research harder. Challenge number 7 is minimizing methane in agriculture. So agricultural methane emissions, particularly from livestock, are a major contributor to global emissions, and reducing those is critical, whether that's shifting to low-meat diets or more carbon-conscious livestock management. We've seen some general progress in this space around regulatory approval of methane suppressants and improved methane monitoring this year, which are starting to help some of the create fertile conditions, pun intended, for AI research in this space. Methane monitoring is a major challenge, and AI techniques for kind of analyzing methane sensor data, tracking cattle, processing satellite imagery are all in active development by research teams. As with other industrial processes, AI is increasingly being used to predict yields and optimize operations for anaerobic digestion plants that produce biomethane under controlled conditions. One of the challenges is around understanding the biological and chemical factors and how those interact in methane emissions in cattle. And so there's research into machine learning-based digital twins and data-driven approaches to this, which include, for example, researchers at Loughborough University who are working on Beef Twin, which is a UK-funded research project looking at how can you combine real-time monitoring of cattle, thermal imaging, methane monitoring, and microbial analysis of waste to bring those data sources together, and then extracting patterns from those data sources using machine learning to enable more data-driven evaluation of changes to farming practices that are targeted to reduce methane emissions. So this is really building some good foundational data and understanding of causal factors in methane production for livestock. Some of the enablers, so as I mentioned, methane reducing feed additives are now available, but consumer skepticism and costs are kind of providing barriers to widespread adoption to those. There is sustained effort to improve agricultural methane data. Research on new monitoring mechanisms is being funded. There was a relatively short-lived methane sat launch, which measured diffuse sources of methane and made it possible to track agricultural emissions across the region. So there's some data available from that. And there's increasing political attention on methane. The UK Methane Action Plan has been published, although it isn't yet at the stage of kind of leveraging AI to drive a lot of that. Some of the gaps and barriers. At scale deployment of AI methane monitoring is relatively limited. Commercial farms don't typically deploy it at scale. We also have, as I said, the mathematical modeling of biological processes is challenging, which is a challenge, but also an opportunity for data-driven approaches using machine learning. There's also quite a lot of focus on cattle And so there's limited work on AI for methane emissions outside of cattle. And then a kind of systemic challenge across the sector is that data sharing across farms is uncommon, and that kind of makes it difficult for bigger kind of like AI tools to be developed. Grand challenge number 8, optimizing EV infrastructure and charging. So a core challenge in electrifying transport is both installing new EV charge points and operating EV charging intelligently to avoid disruptive and expensive impacts on the network. So back with our second grand challenge around we need to expand our electricity networks. If we can optimize EV infrastructure and charging, that can reduce those costs. And another thing included under this is around improving battery technology, which is a key lever in increasing EV adoption. This is an area where it's already relatively mature. So smart EV charging has been demonstrated to be robust and effective. There's a big, large trial, which I'll cover on the next slide, showing the benefits of this. Using AI to identify optimal locations for new charge point infrastructure is a common and relatively mature use case. And the limitation there is less, we don't have AI tools that could do it, and more, what data can we use? There's an increasing focus on charger reliability, which is quite interesting and is driving kind of uses of AI for predictive maintenance. We also see the UK's battery startup ecosystem using AI in battery design, sometimes combining physics-based and generative AI approaches, but also just improving EV battery modeling generally. And linked to battery design, but battery diagnostics during life, including kind of measuring remaining useful life, are like relatively mature research areas, lots of physics-based models, but we're starting to see more AI-based battery testing and health monitoring in the early research stage that require kind of scaling and refining. One of the things around flexible EV demand is that there's a big trial this year that shows that you can use AI-managed EV charging to deliver a 42% reduction in peak household electricity demand, and that consumers can be relatively happy with this. They don't override it very often, and it can deliver savings for them as well as reducing the impact on the energy system. So we're going to see more and more and more of EV charging is going to be managed by AI, particularly as EV adoption increases. Enablers here, EV adoption is increasing. As that grows, the market for AI charging solutions grows too. There's also a policy focus on automating EV participation in the grid, which is really encouraging to see. And that kind of should help underpin some of the, or provide a good environment for AI tools to scale. And we're also seeing new data sources that can help accelerate some AI development, both at the research, kind of new data sets like charging profiles also being available. Some of the barriers, algorithms for optimal public charge point locations are well established, but making sure that those actually provide equitable access can be a bit of a challenge, with rural locations often being poorly served. We're unsurprisingly seeing charge point rollout hitting grid constraints, and part of this is that the distribution networks may struggle to meet the demand for EV charging quickly. And then our final challenge, decarbonising freight and fleets. So this presents a different challenge to electrifying private vehicles, because you've got heavy duty, long range, highly variable operational demands for these. And that there's also like a very high upfront investment in electrifying fleets, which is a big challenge when lots of fleet operators are small businesses. And progress here has been mixed. So there's a broad suite of tools for improving operational efficiency, route optimization, load planning, reducing empty running, and adoption is growing, but those don't always use AI to their fullest, and they also only support kind of partial decarbonisation through efficiency. What we are seeing is some AI-enabled business models. So looking at how can you offer an end-to-end service that optimizes both the design of the charging stations, but also the operation and monitoring of fleets, kind of seeing some AI-powered validation. One of the challenges of these is that the new exciting business models really encouraging, but how successful AI is in delivering the outcome is very dependent on how successful the business model itself is. We see support for operations and logistics, optimal scheduling, optimizing routes, optimizing utilization, as I say, kind of remains an area of continued development. The role of AI in multimodal modeling across multiple freight types. So how do you model it, like as it gets shipped in into a port and then transported by rail or road? There's potential to reduce end-to-end emissions there, and the Transit Hub is looking at that in quite a lot of detail, which is quite interesting. And then in the very long term, kind of autonomous vehicles have the potential to support decarbonisation, but are still really at the trial stage in this area. An example of where AI is being used is in reducing empty trips. So about 30% of heavy goods vehicles journeys are empty vehicles returning to a depot. And there are several organizations addressing this. One example is Haulage Hub, who uses AI to kind of pair loads that need to go with routes that are already, like trucks already going back empty. And that's been able to reduce the rate of empty runs by about 10%. There's some key enablers here, lots of investment in decarbonising freight and increased visibility of multimodal freight data. But there's also greater challenges around access to standardized data, particularly across modes. And we see as well that there's a need to coordinate policy actions across transport and energy. So what next? Well, this, as I say, is the summary of progress this year. And we can see that we hope that there will be more progress in the coming year. This is the first of a series of reports, and we will be doing an annual report on this each year, monitoring the progress. So we would love to hear from you if you look at our decarbonisation challenges and you are aware of ones that we haven't tracked, or if you are working on an AI solution that's delivering decarbonisation. You can contact us at advice@turing.ac.uk, or you can also join our mailing list. So one of the key things to flag is that we are about to launch a tool to help people track AI solutions to decarbonisation challenges, and we'll be running some workshops around that in a couple of months' time. So if you would be interested in participating in that, then please do sign up to our mailing list. So that has been a rapid whistle-stop tour through the report. You've got the link to report in the chat, but hopefully we also have Emily Shuckburgh, the Chief Scientific Advisor for the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. So Emily, if you are here, please do turn your camera on.
Hello, hello.
Hello, great to have you join us. So I'm really interested to hear, kind of looking back at 2015, like what development in AI for decarbonisation most excited you, and why was that?
Oh, thank you, Sam. And thank you for giving that overview of the report, which I thought was just super exciting. And in many ways, I actually think the thing that most excites me is just the wealth and breadth of the different examples that report has highlighted of like actual real world applications of AI. And I noticed in the chat there's been some really useful and interesting commentary about, you know, the different types of AI that are being primarily represented here, but the different types of let's say machine learning predominantly and other associated AI related approaches that are really starting to deliver real returns in terms of decarbonisation. Whether, I mean, you know, there was some, I love the agriculture examples, actually, the digital twin of cows and skippy scalp, I thought was great. But also, you highlighted some of the other key successes of the last year, the solar nowcasting, which is making real differences in terms of the efficiency of bringing solar onto the energy system, and the emissions reductions that were quantified associated with that, the EV charging side of things that you also highlighted, and then some of those really hard to abate sectors, cement and steel, where again, like real reductions through the use of AI approaches. So I think, to me, that's what actually was most powerful from this report, was that breadth of different examples that you brought together.
Are there any areas that you feel are more urgent or promising for the next year that you can give the answer, we need to do it all again, but are there any areas where you're like, no, we really need to move forwards on this urgently?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the report itself highlighted some areas where there's still opportunities, and so I think AI-enabled flexibility in terms of energy networks is one area where clearly there's starting to be increased opportunities to deliver in that area. Smart substations was another thing that was mentioned in the report that looked pretty interesting, as well as, I mean, we've again in the chat, there's the obvious kind of elephant in the room about the energy consumption of data centers and increased use of Gen AI, in particular driving energy consumption, but looking at how that could be developed more flexibly, and the sort of energy demand of those data centers to be managed throughout the day, so that optimized when there's more renewable sources of energy generation, for example. So those sort of things seem pretty interesting. I do think, I mean, again, as has been noted in the chat, there are lots, I mean, pretty much on a week by week basis. I sitting in the computer science department in Cambridge, and my colleagues seem to have a different advance on, in terms of AI technologies on a week by week basis. So I think the other key thing for this coming year is just going to be understanding where those latest advances in AI might be applicable to decarbonisation. And I think some of the challenges that or challenges people have posed in the chat here about this kind of, how on the one hand we can be looking at AI to help in decarbonisation challenges, whilst at the same time recognising that very real energy consumption of some of the Gen AI approaches, navigating that, I think, is going to be really quite important.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I think we do see some people who have a real insight into what are the decarbonisation challenges and into AI manage to find this is a really powerful way to do it and have huge impact. So I think the solar nowcasting is a great example. And it's that the deep insight into what is the problem, and a real focus on how do you apply AI, starting with the problem and then applying AI rather than the other way around, I think is pretty critical for decarbonisation.
Yeah.
Are there any gaps or barriers that you see are critical to address in the coming year, that you we've got plans to overcome it, or you have suggestions for what we should be doing to overcome those barriers?
Yeah, so I mean, there are long-standing challenges in terms of data governance, systems integration, and that sort of thing, that are not so much the technical challenges, but the challenges in terms of that supporting structure that's necessary to enable some of the technologies that have been highlighted in your report to really have the scale and deployment that they could do. So there's been a recent review of AI deployment in electricity networks that's been launched. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that comes together. But more generally, just the lack of having open APIs and common standards, continues to remain a bit of a challenge. And so it'd be really great to see if there was some progress associated with that.
Yeah, and hopefully we're going to run this report on an annual basis, so hopefully we'll be able to report progress against those barriers as well. It's been really great to see so many people joining this call, and we've got people from many different areas: government, industry, startups, academia. What do you think people listening to this can do to accelerate decarbonisation using AI?
Yeah, so in many ways, and I, again, I think that this report and the Advice Project more generally has been a brilliant example of this. In many ways, what is required is a whole system response, and it's all those different actors working together. And sometimes, coming back to the previous answer that I gave, where I was highlighting some of those that kind of structural integration issues, that in part is about getting different parts of that whole system to properly connect together, such that we do have things that are interoperable, we do have data that is able to be shared, and these sort of approaches built off it. So in many ways, I think that the challenge is precisely for the different people who are engaged in this kind of burgeoning community to come together and to understand. The example you just gave actually of the solar nowcasting, that was different groups coming together, identifying what the problem is, what the technological capacity to deliver against that through AI-based approaches, where the relevant data could be brought together and create solutions that actually then are able to deliver real world impact. That seems to be the key challenge here. It's not so much actually the technology itself, it's about how we bring that system together. So hats off to everyone involved in the Advice Project. I think it's really not just inspiring in the sense of this report, as I think is quite exciting and inspiring. It's starting, there's nothing like a whole set of real world examples to really create the sense of kind of energy and momentum behind this as being a really productive area to be involved in. But also it's about really critically bringing together that whole system community. So I'm really looking forward to what the project does over the course of this year, because I think that it'll be really fascinating to look in a year's time at the scale of what different approaches we come forward with over the next 12 months.
And if I can repeat a plug from earlier, like one of the things that we are focusing on in this coming year is bringing people who are working on similar problems together and helping kind of track the solutions, help people talk about those. So please, if you haven't already, please do join our mailing list. We'll be running a series of events and different mechanisms for you to get engaged in that over the coming year. Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you everyone for joining us for this session. The recording and a link to the report that you have already will be circulated shortly after this call. Thank you everyone, and have a great day.